So picture this. It was the weekend. I couldn't shake off this catchy tune. You know it, Age of Aquarius, from Hair. So I ended up diving deep into the whole original album. Then, while hustling on some work, the Swan solo from Carmina Burana slides into my playlist. And boom! Not the playlist itself, but a realization hits me. Hair and Carl Orff's Carmina Burana, they're like two peas in a pod. Okay, not identical peas, but they're vibing on a similar theme. And it's not just the themes, they're sipping from the same well of inspiration. Let me break it down for you. Historical context, musical elements, themes, and cultural impact. Now, Jerome Ragni and James Rado, backed up by the musical genius Galt McDermott, are the masterminds behind Hair. I gotta confess for a moment, I'm not sure if I'm nailing the pronunciation of Ragni's name. I've never actually heard it, I've only ever read it, you know? Anyway, these two cats crossed paths in 1964, and together they cooked up Hair after a stint together in an off-Broadway production called Hang Down Your Head and Die. That's a pretty classic name, right? Hair's main characters, well, they're essentially Rado and Ragni's alter egos. Rado's Claude, the brooding romantic, and Ragni's Burger, the outgoing dude. Their tight, kind of explosive friendship, totally mirrored in the musical. Rado spills the beans, or he did anyway, that they were tight buds. It was a passionate friendship that they poured into creating this piece. All the drama between them ended up on the stage. Now, Hair's birth was even more of a mashup of real folks, imaginary characters, and the wild scene in the East Village. Picture a crew dodging the draft and dropping out. The birth of Hair was like, let's bring the excitement from the streets and parks to the stage. They even snagged some cast members literally straight off the streets. One day they were walking down the street, and that's when they found Shelley Plimpton, just doing her thing. Oh, and by the way, the name Hair, it's inspired by a painting by Jim Dine that Rado and Ragni stumbled upon during a museum stroll. A painting with just a tuft of hair, and they were like, yup, that's the title of our musical. That's how Hair was born. Now consider the birth of Carl Orff's Carmina Burana. It all starts back in 1934. Orff gets his hands on this ancient text from the 11th and 12th centuries, sprinkled with bits from the 13th century. A law student named Michel Hoffman helps him pick out 24 poems from this text and stitches together a libretto, mostly in Latin, but with a sprinkle of Middle High German and Old French. What he has on paper is 5 major sections, or 25 movements in total, and it is a series of poems that cover all the timeless themes, the highs and lows of fortune, the fleeting nature of life, the joy of spring's return, and the good and bad sides of drinking, eating, gambling, and lust. Now, let's talk a little bit closer about where Carmina Burana's text comes from. Carmina Burana is actually a collection of poems, as I've already said, that were originally in Latin, and this is the scholarly language of Italy and Western Europe in the 11th, 12th, 13th century. The people that wrote this were a series of students and clergy, and it was done mostly in secret, and they were all done through kind of fun lyrics. But these were not average holy verses that you'd expect some clergy to write. These are body anthems of young clergymen not holding back. And many of the poems actually throw shade at the Catholic Church. The neat thing about this collection of poetry is that it has a lot of heavyweights in it. There's some poems by Peter of Blois and Walter of Châtillon. And then there's a bunch of series of poems that are written by a person that is simply known as the arch poet. The group that put all this together, the body clergymen, are known as the Gauliards. So, the Gauliards were the original rebels of the 12th and 13th centuries. And they were mostly young clerics, as I said, from France, Germany, Spain, Italy, and England, so all across Europe. And they mostly all lived in universities and would quietly take shots at the church through poetry, song, and even sometimes performance. They were protesters, especially during carnival times like the Feast of Fools or other moments of church liturgy, like Twelfth Night. Now here's the kicker. Do you see a vibe between these Gauliards and the counterculture of the 1960s? I totally do. It's like a déjà vu of students getting fed up with the establishment and expressing their frustration through exploring taboo stuff. You know, the classics, drugs, sex, and rock and roll. Okay, for the Gauliards there wasn't rock and roll, but music of that time, if it was sung in the liturgy, had to be unaccompanied. So they kind of created a certain kind of rebellious music when they added accompaniment with things like the hurdy-gurdy or other stringed instruments. See, I can see that both Hair and Carmina Burana come out of a countercultural space. They embody freedom and subversion. They are both expressions of youth. And furthermore, they expound on the same subjects. But I'll talk about that more in the next video. So consider this continued in part 2.